Okay, so now we're going to learn how to create a custom brush. And I'm going to start off with something rather simple. I'm going to just first go to File, New, create a new canvas. I'm going to change the resolution to 300 because you want to make sure that the brush is a large enough size so that it doesn't become too pixelated. Because obviously you're going to be working on canvas sizes that are much larger. So let's change the canvas size to about, let's say, 1,000. Should be good. Click OK. Alright, so obviously in order to create a custom brush, you're going to need some default brush of some sort. I have a couple custom brushes here already, but I do have a oval brush. Just make sure that there's no textures applied already, and shape dynamics, minimum diameter, and transfers on so that the pen pressure and the opacity, jitter, and all that will take place. So pen pressures selected, and this way we have something to work with. You can go into the brush tip shape and change the hardness of the edges, you'll see here. So they can become softer like an airbrush or harder like a pen tool. So let's go with something harder. Alright, so as far as a custom brush goes, you can create any shape of anything that you want to be the actual silhouette of this brush, and you can fill that in. But if you do want to just create something rather simple, you can just use the selection marquee tool or lasso tool. Um, the free range lasso tool is probably the best. So let's create something that is somewhat, let's say, circular, but it's not perfect. So let's create some rougher edges to the silhouette, and that's pretty good. We don't want to do anything that's too crazy because I'm not looking to create anything that is going to branch off, such as clouds or anything like that. And there's a lot of stuff we're going to be able to do in the brush presets once we actually start creating this brush. So let's fill it in with a complete black and use the fill tool. So we're going to fill the selection. Actually, first let's say Control Z, make a new layer, and then fill that selection. So now we're going to get rid of the marquee outline selection. And the first thing that you want to do is figure out again, do you want to add in any breakups along the edges? So you could use the eraser and let's change the size of that. Go in and just break it up a little bit more. Go add in a couple areas. But it's really all up to you and what you want, and you can, there's a lot of fooling around that you can do with this sort of stuff. Sometimes it makes a big difference, sometimes it really doesn't really matter all that much. But let's add in a couple other areas again, and then let's maybe change the opacity so that the edges are a little softer. Okay, so I'm just erasing out the edges just so that the silhouette's still there, but just so it's not as hard of an edge around the actual brush itself. And you can go in as far as you would like. just depends, what you want for this brush. So hit up a couple other areas on the inside, and that's fine. So now you can take this and you could do whatever you want. If you hit Control T, that's going to be free transform, and you can either spin it around, and if you hold down Shift, it's going to angle it, perfectly to 90% or 180 or whatever you want it to do. So move this around and figure out what angle you want the default for the brush to be situated in. So this is fine just as for an example. So that's it. You create any type of shape that you want using the selection tool, or you can even use a brush and you can go in and you can go ahead and paint out any kind of shape. And once you're happy with the silhouette of your brush, then you're going to do Edit, Define Brush Preset, and then you're going, now the one thing you have to take note of is the size of the brush. So again, that's why we started off with a much larger canvas, because the default brush size is at 696 pixels. So now label our brush name, and let's again go back to the Rocky scales, and in case we decide to change some options later on, let's just add number 1 and click OK. So now it's already become a brush in your brush list. But as I'm going to show you real quick, let's go on to a new layer. You can, I'm using the brackets that were a hotkey I set up to change the scale of the brush. So if we make it small, large, immediately it doesn't look all that interesting because you haven't actually applied any brush presets to this yet. So what you want to do is go into the brush settings, and now you have all the brush presets that you can choose from. And we're going to add the shape dynamics, and let's not make it too small, but we'll make about, say, 30%, 31% minimum diameter. Let's add in a size jitter just to break it up a little bit. We're going to apply transfer because we do want the pen pressure on there, so immediately see a slight difference depending on how hard I'm pressing and the breakup of the silhouette of the brush. If we zoom in a little closer here at 100%, again you can kind of see some differences going on there. Okay, so to me now that's decent. You can add a flow jitter and maybe boost up the opacity jitter if you want to have a little bit more breakup going on. But to me, I don't really want to do too much with that, because what we're going to do is we're going to apply that texture that we created. And first, let's change the brush shape. So the brush tip shape, I want to make it a little bit more oval, and then go back into the shape dynamics, and you see that the angle jitter is based on the initial direction. So as you can see how the brush is an oval shape horizontally, if I angle my initial direction to whatever angle I'm producing with these the pen stylus, immediately it's going to change the angle based on the initial direction. So as I'm doing this, depending on how hard I press or how light I press, you can see the breakup. And in order to get rid of how much space there is Under brush tip shape, you want to just choose, let's say about, let's make it 5%. So now you can see it's a smoother transition. And if we go back into pen pressure and the flow jitter, that's pretty good for now. So now let's apply the texture. So immediately it's going to apply the default texture, but we want to go in and we want to add the textures that we created, which here's the original one, and then in the version here I just boosted the values a little more. I added the I boosted the whites up a little more so that the texture comes out and it'll show a little bit better. Now what you want to do is choose subtract under the different modes. Subtract usually allows more of the texture to pop out. You can also go with multiply, which is another good option, but let's choose subtract. Make sure that the scale of the texture is around the same size at 100%. You could choose it to go a little smaller or larger depending on the size you're painting at. But for this, the purpose of this demonstration, let's choose about 65%. And then the depth. The depth is what's really going to control how the texture shows up. So here we are at 0%, and if you go all the way to 100%, immediately you can see what's going on. So that's making the most, or it's going to really pop out the most of the actual pattern itself. Now you don't want to go too strong, so we jump that down, and let's say let's take the scale down a little further just for the sake of this demonstration, and there you go. And the more that you overlap it, because it's just going to continue to build up until it comes to complete black. But that'll allow you to basically fool around with a lot of options, and you have the brush stroke that is going in the initial direction that you apply it in, and again, once you change the size of the brush, it's not going to affect the size of the texture because that's under the texture scale. So now let's get rid of both of these layers, and let's choose some color just to kind of show you how this will work. If we want to go ahead and, let's say, take off the texture start, oh, I'm sorry, I'm still in grayscale mode, so let's change it to RGB, flatten, okay. So let's apply some color, build it up a little bit. Okay, so now if we take a slightly lighter and more saturated color, and now we want to apply the texture, again, we can change the depth of that texture to whatever we want. And also the opacity will also affect how much of that's going to show through. So you can see a slight, texture breakup. But if we really want to get a lot out of this, and then you can also click invert, but what we're going to do is go and apply, let's say at 70%, give or take, and get as much as we can out of this texture. Something else that you can do is then choose an inverted darker color, and then we're going to invert the texture, and all that's going to do is that's going to fill in the negative space. And then if we go back and we go ahead and apply a lighter color, invert it again, and that's going to go ahead and fill in the inverted selection. You can get some smoother transitions going on. Just lower the opacity of the brush, and the more that you overlap it and overlay it, you can really see the way it would start to build up and go ahead and create a nice, you know, texture to whatever creature or whatever environment you're creating. And then you can go ahead and use a normal brush, or if you want to just really take down the depth of the texture, you can go ahead and apply your own patterns as you actually paint them in for scales or fish scales or reptile or anything like that. You can go ahead and start painting in on top. And that's, to me, a better way of applying your own patterns for some type of skin surface texture on top of the base texture that's already there. And again, you can add a little more depth so that while you're doing this, if you really want to get a lot out of it, go ahead and throw that up. Let's do some brighter highlights, and you can see that it's really going to break up just the areas that are showing through with the depth that you applied to the subtraction. And it's just, this is a good way to really make a nice custom brush and supply some real texture to whatever it is that you're painting, whether it's a creature design or whether it's an environment. So now we want to save the brush at a decent scale. So as you can see up here, we're at 100, 200, let's say 500. And you're going to make sure that whatever you have these presets on is going to be saved in your brush. So let's not make it too much with the depth. Let's keep it at about, say, 50 something percent. The scale, let's move it up to about 75%. Keep it on subtract and keep it on invert, and zoom down. Let's Control A. Let's delete that. And just so we can see what our brush is initially going to look like, let's maybe take the scale down a little bit, and let's take the depth down just a little bit more. So that looks pretty good. So now what you need to do is just go into you can use your stylus or your mouse and right click, and then up in here you'll see this little arrow. You want to click that arrow and click New Brush Preset, which is going to save all of the presets to the brush that you created originally down here, which is the default. So you click New Brush Preset, click OK, rename it as, let's say, O2, click OK, and now that's added into your brush list. And now you can go ahead and paint with that brush and change it to whatever you want, so that when you change to a different brush, you can always go back to that setting and your brush has all the custom presets to it. And that's that. I mean, there's a lot of fooling around that you can do, to customize it to whatever you want, but that's a pretty simple way of fooling around with a lot of different ways of adding textures, different presets to the brushes, for whatever it is that you feel like you're going to use the brush for. And it takes some experimenting, but you'll come up with something interesting, and you'll find out how useful it is for whatever the subject matter is. So that's about that.